Okay, so I wanted to start off the presentation by showing you examples of my grandparents' naturalization certificates. This is my grandmother, Lumpy, and my grandfather, Pavo. And they both were naturalized in the 1940s. And according to my father, the reason they did it was because they were afraid of being deported after World War II started. So my grandfather filed his papers in, I think, 1942, and you can see he became a citizen in 1945. And my grandmother filed hers a little bit later and became a citizen in 1947. And these are the only relatives that I actually have these certificates of naturalization for. From what I understand, these papers were, given to the individual, but no copies, backup copies, are kept anyplace else. So I'm just lucky that my father had these, so I was able to see them. So we'll start with the handout. Okay, so with naturalization records, it's a two-step process where a person first fills out a declaration of intention and then follows that by filling out their petition for naturalization. But not all our ancestors became naturalized citizens, and many people would fill out the declaration of intention and never follow through with the petition for naturalization. And up until 1952, if you didn't file your petition for naturalization within 7 years of filing your first document, the Declaration of Intention, the whole thing would become void and you would have to start all over again. Also, people could fill out a Declaration of Intention in one court and their petition in a separate one, which sometimes makes it hard to track down the records. So I put together a very abbreviated timeline about naturalization procedures here. It started back in 1790 with only free white adult alien males who had resided in the United States for 2 years who were eligible to become citizens. Then 5 years later, free white females could become citizens, and they changed the residency requirement from 2 years to 5 years. And this is still true today, the 5-year residency requirement. And this was also when they started the two-step naturalization process that was in use up to 1952. Now, during the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s, we had no set procedures for naturalization, and they took place in many different courts using different forms and different fees. And at one point, there were over 5,000 federal, state, and local courts doing naturalization processing. So this finally came to an end in 1906 with the Basic Naturalization Act. And this is what established standard forms and fees. And it also required that all the naturalization papers have a copy sent to the Bureau of Immigration in Washington. And also in that year, they required a knowledge of English and a literacy requirement in order to become a naturalized citizen. And this 1906 Act really was a big help, well, for genealogists now, because the forms that were established provide a lot more information about an individual than the forms that were being used before 1906. And I'll show you examples of this when we go on to the websites. In 1933, the Bureau of Immigration became the Immigration and Naturalization Service. In 1952, the Declaration of Intentions were no longer required, but they're still optional today if people want to fill them out. And then in 2003, the INS became the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, which they call the USCIS, and they're under the Department of Homeland Security. So there were exceptions to naturalization procedures, and they mostly applied to women and military personnel. Up until 1922, wives of naturalized men automatically became citizens without having to file any paperwork, or the same was true for an immigrant woman who married a US citizen. And a lot of times people are looking for naturalization papers for their female relatives, and before 1922, you're not going to find any. After 1922, women could file their own naturalization papers, and they did not automatically become a citizen if they married an American or a naturalized citizen. And up to 1940, children under 21 automatically became citizens upon the naturalization of their father. So again, if you're looking for papers for someone up to 1940 who was under 21, they're not going to have had filed their own papers. Now, the interesting thing comes into effect here in 1907 regarding American women. In 1907, they passed an act that an American woman who married an immigrant would lose her citizenship and take on the nationality of her husband. If her husband became naturalized, she also became a naturalized citizen. But if he didn't, she would have to go through the entire naturalization process to regain her American citizenship. And this continued on in the Cable Act of 1922. If an American woman married an immigrant, she would not lose her citizenship as long as her husband was eligible for citizenship. But if they lived abroad for 2 years in his home country or for 5 years outside the United States, she would lose her citizenship again. In 1931, these restrictions were lifted, but there were still problems for women who had previously lost their citizenship between 1907 and 1922. So this is why the Act of 1936 came in, but it only applied for women who were divorced or who were widows, that they could regain their citizenship by taking an oath of allegiance instead of having to file all the paperwork again. And finally, in 1940, all women who had lost their citizenship by marriage could regain it by just taking an oath of allegiance. So you can see there was a lot of complications for American women during these time periods. And so you could have a relative who was an American by birth, but you may find naturalization papers for her, depending upon the time period. Now, another group who had exceptions were the military. And this goes back to the Civil War, 1862. Honorably discharged Army veterans were allowed to file petitions for naturalization without having to file a declaration of intention, and they only had to live in the country for 1 year, as opposed to the 5 years that was the normal requirement. Then when we got to World War I, again, the Declaration of Intention and residency requirements were waived for those serving in the war. And these naturalizations could be done at military bases or courts near the military bases. And after the war, alien immigrants serving in the armed forces could apply for citizenship without the residency requirement or the Declaration of Intention. And in 1942, very similar requirements that they didn't have to file the Declaration of Intention, and they were exempt from the residency requirement also. And the National Archives in New York City does have military petitions for naturalization covering World War I, World War II, the Korean War, but only for New York and New Jersey. Our National Archives in New York City just covers New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico. So what exactly would you find on these forms? Well, before 1906, you're really not going to find a lot of information. And I personally have many naturalization records before 1906 from my relatives, and there's really next to nothing on them. Pretty much you're going to see the person's address, names of witnesses, and the name and the ruler of the country where the person was formerly a citizen of. And I'll show you an example from one of my relatives when we go on to Ancestry. Now, if you're lucky enough to have your relative file papers after 1906, you get a lot more information. On the Declaration of Intention, these are some of the things you'll see: their name, age, occupation, personal description, place and date of birth, last foreign residence, marital status, and the spouse's name and birth location, date and port of arrival, and the name of the ship they arrived on, their present place of residence, and they also had to declare that they were not an anarchist or a polygamist. And after 1929, it was required to have a photo, and it asked if they were married or had children, the name of the spouse and the children. Now, on the petition for naturalization, you have many of the same items, but it also added some more details, like the date of arrival in the United States. It asked for the arrival and the departure ports, the date when their US residence began, the length of residence in the state, if they had any name changes, the marital status, including listing the wife's name and date of birth, and the dates and places of birth and residence of all their children. So you can see that these later petitions for naturalization would give you a lot of information about your ancestor's family, and then you could use that information to start looking for things like marriage records, birth certificates, and and passenger lists based on the information on the declarations of intention and the petition for naturalization. So in this area in New York, the original naturalization papers are kept. One of the major locations is the National Archives. That's down on Bowling Green in Manhattan. And here is a list of the naturalization records they would have there. They have the federal court records. They have New York City, state and local courts as well, up to 1906. They have 2 counties in upstate New York, Clinton and Essex counties, up to 1906. Plus, they have the district courts for New Jersey and Puerto Rico. You can also find naturalization records at the county level, such as in Mineola and Riverhead. And my grandparents' naturalization papers are in Mineola because I recently had to get copies of them, and they keep them in these little ledger books, and you have to go in and request a copy and then have to wait a while before you actually get it, but they are there. So the best place to start to try and find out if your ancestor became naturalized would be naturalization indexes, and they're located on the German Genealogy Group website and the Italian Genealogy Group websites, as well as the Jewish Genealogy Society of New York, which the Jewish Genealogy Society of New York just has Brooklyn indexes, and the other two groups have a lot of different naturalization records. So as you can see, I have a listing here of what you could find on the German Genealogy Group and Italian Genealogy Group website. They have the indexes to naturalizations that are kept at National Archives. So these are the district courts in Manhattan, the Eastern and the Southern District, and I've included the counties that each one of these cover. They also have the records for the Northern District and Western District of New York, and here are their counties. The index also covers the Bronx. It covers Nassau, Queens, Richmond, Suffolk. It has the two upstate counties up to 1906. And the websites also have a civil service naturalization list just for 1905 and 1906 that has a list of naturalization certificates of people who took civil service exams in Manhattan. Then we have Camden, Newark, and Trenton district court records. And also we have these records from Puerto Rico. And these are all those courts are covered just on the German and Italian Genealogy Group website. And of course, these records are for everyone. They're not just for German and Italian ancestors. Then I've also included some links to other indexes, such as the Brooklyn Index here by the Jewish Genealogy Society. We have a Westchester County Index that's through the Westchester Archives. I have links for Albany County, Ontario, Ulster, Dutchess, and Jefferson County, which is upstate. And some of them just have printed alphabetized indexes, and some of them you can search. Okay, so if you don't find your relative in one of these indexes, there are a few other records you could look at to try and determine whether your ancestor became naturalized. One of the places to try is federal census records. And also the New York State Census, particularly in 1925, has information about naturalization. Passenger lists, depending on the year, can show the date and the court where your ancestor was naturalized. World War I draft registration cards have a space where they ask if the person is a citizen, an alien, if they've filed their papers. And also passport applications can give you information about the year and the court where your relative was naturalized. So today we're going to look at Ancestry.com, which is still free till the end of May on our website with remote access from home. FamilySearch.org is always free. It's the website run by the Mormon Church. If you ever go to Suffolk County or know someone who has the Suffolk County Library card, MyHeritage.com has naturalization indexes, and Fold3.com does have some actual naturalization records, images of them. And it's good to look on different websites because the indexes can have a lot of misspellings in them because they were created by volunteers who are trying to read handwriting that sometimes can be very difficult to read. And I've included some links here at the end for more information on naturalization procedures from Family Search, the New York State Archives, the National Archives, the USCIS, and these two other websites also have information on naturalization records. And the one from New York State Archives is very good because it does break it down into different time periods on, how naturalization procedures were done. So I'm going to now switch over to the German Genealogy Group website, and we can take a look at the naturalization index that's here. So if you go over to database searches and go down to naturalizations, it's going to bring you to our main screen. And this is showing you the list of all the different naturalization records in this index with descriptions of some of them. So we'll go down to the bottom and click on search. So in this search box here, you can click off all of them, none of them, just, specific ones you want to look at. I'm going to put in one of my relatives. Okay, and in the search box here, you can leave it exact, sounds like, or wildcard. And if you click on this wildcard, it shows you can use an asterisk to represent multiple characters or this underscore for a single character. It also lets you just search by certain years if you'd like to do it that way. So we get the results list over here. And these are my great-grandfather and 3 of his brothers. They were all naturalized in District Court, the Southern District. These are petitions for naturalizations, and you don't see it that often where you have the person's exact birth date. And then this is the date they were naturalized. So in order to request the records, what you would do is go to this Documents and Forms button. And there are documents here that you can print out for each one of these different courts to request a copy of the papers. So we're going to press on this one for National Archives. So you would fill it out with the information you find on the index, and then it's $10 for a copy, check or money order. Here's where you would mail it to, their email address if you have questions, their phone number. And it's the same for each of these different courts. Like if you were requesting from Nassau County, it's at the county clerk's office in Mineola. And here's their information, the self-addressed stamped envelope, and $5. And same for Suffolk, except Suffolk actually We'll email it to you, and they don't charge anything. Okay. So let's go on over now to Ancestry. Okay, so we go to eResearch. Oops, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. eResearch and down to Genealogy. Okay, and this is the button you want to click right now to get free access from home. You put in your card number. So what I wanted to show you now was examples of other documents that you could use to get naturalization information. So I'm going to look at census records, just two examples of census records for you. Okay, so if we go to the 1920 census, and we go up to here, oops. Stop. So here they have citizenship questions in the 1920 census. And this was the only federal census where they actually asked you what year you were naturalized. So you can see that people are, you know, saying 1898, 1905, it looks like 1905, 1869. And the only thing with this is a lot of times people are trying to remember back, could be 15, 20 years, maybe when they have been naturalized. So the year could be correct, but you always have to think that maybe you want to look a year before, a year after, and use it as a kind of a benchmark, but not an absolute. Because I know with my relatives, sometimes the years didn't match up with what I actually found in the records. And we also want to look at the New York State Census for 1925. And on this census, this was, again, the only time they asked you if naturalized, when and where. And you can see, I'll blow it up some more. This says Brooklyn, 1875, New York City, 1900. And on the next page, there's more. New York City, 1905, Brooklyn, 1884. And again, this is many years after the event would have taken place. So, you know, you want to, again, maybe look a year or two around what the date is that they're giving you here. But these are the two census records that actually will give you a year. So we want to go now. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a passport application. Okay, for my great-grandfather. Okay. So my great-grandfather traveled quite a bit and had a lot of passport applications that have been digitized. So on this passport application, in the middle, trying to get it to stay. I was naturalized as a citizen of the United States before Southern District Court of New York in New York City on March 14th, 1901. So there you've got your court and the exact date. And on this passport application, you also get information about when he came to the United States, where he was living before, what his current address is, why he's traveling. And I'm just going to flip the page so I can show you. There they are. This is my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother, and my great-aunt. And they even, on the passport applications, you've even got a physical description of the person. Okay. So now I want to switch to passenger lists. Okay. And go to a different relative. Okay, passenger list. Okay, so this is a passenger list from 1920. And up at the top here, you can see, hopefully, there you go. The column is, if naturalized, give name and location of court which issued naturalization papers and date of papers. So you can see down this column, we've got people, County of Kings, Brooklyn, and the date, U.S. District Court, New York, Supreme Court of New York, and my relative is down here, Supreme Court, New York, September 13th, 1912. And I looked back through some of these passenger lists trying to figure out when this column might have been added. But the best I could come up with was sometime between 1915 and 1919. Because I found one relative in 1950 where there was no column, and by 1919 I did see one. So on older, passenger lists, you're not going to see that column. And there's one more. Okay, and this one's actually really nice because it's typewritten. And it's really easy to see the information about where the individuals were naturalized and what courts. And you even see this person indicating American by marriage. And by marriage here, Supreme Court of New York, and the date. Now, World War I draft registration cards. Okay, if we, on the World War I draft registration cards, there is a question here, number 4, and it asks the person, are you a natural born citizen, a naturalized citizen, an alien, or have you declared your intention? So in other words, have they filled out declaration of intention papers? My relative hadn't done anything at this point, so he was listed as an alien, though he did actually fill out his papers a few years, maybe about 6 years after this. But just so you know that that's a question on this registration card, and all men, whether they were citizens or not, were required to fill out these registration cards in 1917 and 1918. So it's a good idea to look for this if you haven't looked for it already. And now I will show you some examples of the actual naturalization papers. So this first relative of mine is going to be an example of the records that were done before 1906. Okay, so this was done in, I believe it's so this is 1897, and this is in Declaration of Intention. So here is, we've got his name, obviously, and that he is renouncing his alliance to the Sultan of Turkey, and that he arrived in the United States October 18th, 1896, and it lists his current address in New York, and that's about all you get. So it's not a lot to go on for genealogy information. Oops, let's go back. Okay, and then this is his naturalization petition that was filed in 1902. And it does give a little bit more information, but not a lot. It gives his occupation. And again, oops, sorry about that. Okay, sorry. Clicked the wrong button and completely lost my ancestry. Sorry. Let me get back. Okay. Okay, and then it gives his current address, the year he came here, and there's a witness here, and it's actually one of his brothers, which I found pretty interesting. So it has information, but not a heck of a lot compared to the newer ones. And this was kind of interesting, that attached to his petition, it actually is a note from the US Consulate General in Constantinople saying that my great uncle was in Constantinople from the 18th of November till the 10th of January in 1899. So that was pretty cool. So now I'm going to show a more recent example of another relative. Okay, so This one is from 1924, so you can see the difference. Let's go back one, two. Unfortunately, his paper got kind of messed up when it was being microfilmed. Okay. So here's a difference between the older one and here's a newer one. And up here at the top, it says that it's invalid after 7 years if you don't file your petition of naturalization. But this gives you a lot more detail about an ancestor. It's got a physical description of him. It tells you his birth date and location where he was born, the name of the port that he left from, the name of the ship he came on, the name of his wife and where she was born, and what day he arrived in the United States. And then if we go to the next page, on his petition for naturalization, it actually gives his wife's birth date and the town in Canada where she was born. Plus it gives the names of both his children, their birth dates, and their birth locations. And before I had seen this, I couldn't understand why I couldn't find a marriage for him in New York. And it turns out he was married in Washington, D.C. And by seeing this is where his daughter was born, that gave me the idea to look outside of New York for his marriage record. And then again, we've got the witnesses. And again, this actually is another relative who's one of the witnesses. So you should look at the witnesses on your documents because you never know when they could potentially be relatives. So now we've got time. We're going to go to family search. Okay, and with family search, you need to create a username and password. And we're going to search records. And I'm just going to go down to the collection title. Okay, and I wanted to show you this particular one because my relative changed his name. And on his declaration of intention, you can actually see his name change is written in. So his last name was Aratinji, and he changed it to Lewis. And when he filled out this declaration of intention, he signed it with his new name. And he also, in the petition for naturalization, again, you can see this is what he changed it to, and this was his original last name. And again, it gives you, the information about when he came here, his occupation, and he has, his witnesses, and yet another relative is a witness. But I just thought it was interesting to see his name change included in these documents. And I also wanted to show you in this particular record set, New York County naturalization records, If you click on here, it actually shows you all the counties that are in this collection. And even though the dates here say 1791 to 1980, it all depends on the county that you're looking at. Because if we look at Nassau County, you can see that there really isn't a lot in here for Nassau County. 1899 to 1903, and a few that, and then continuing on to 1906. So you really need to investigate what years are included when you're doing your searches. If we go to Suffolk, it's a whole different story. You can see we've got a lot of declarations of intentions, a lot of petitions. We even have special naturalizations, and I'm assuming those are World War I from the date. So those are probably military naturalizations. But you really need to look at what's included, and don't just assume that the date ranges are for the county you're looking at. Again, even if we go over to Queens, you can see lots and lots of records. So it always pays to read descriptions of collections when you're doing your searching. And if we just go back again, and just down here, if you put in New York naturalizations, on Family Search, you can see a list very quickly of what they have. The Eastern District, indexes, Southern District, and Western. Okay, so let me stop sharing. Okay, so that is my presentation in a nutshell here. Are there any questions? I'm going to be doing 2 classes in June, which are more or less my introduction to genealogy that I've done in the library before, where the first class on the 17th is going over library databases, Ancestry, Heritage Quest, some of our digitized newspapers. And then the following Wednesday would be searching for particular kinds of records like passenger lists, the passport applications, searching for obituaries, searching in the newspapers and looking at the different newspaper collections. So I just wanted to let you know those are coming up, and they're already on EventKeeper, right? Yeah. You can go and sign up for them on the calendar of events on our website, and they're both going to be from 2 to 3 again on Wednesdays. So any questions? No?
I
Yeah.
have a question.
I'll try to answer.
I found the manifest for my father.
Mm-hmm.
It's 1921. We never could find that he went through Ellis Island. He's not listed coming through Ellis Island. But I did find the manifest. They spelled his name wrong, but it says Munya, but next to sex, it says female.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
and he was 5 years old.
Oh.
I always received flack about my father's name, that it was a nickname. It couldn't be a real name. It must have been a different thing, but it says on the manifest, Munia.
Mm. It's just how someone heard it, I guess.
It's typed.
It's typed?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of mistakes on the records. That's why, the indexes, using the indexes, you have to really be creative in searching, because for people's names were misheard. our volunteers that did these indexes for the naturalization records, the handwriting was atrocious, you know, on some of them. And because I did some of them myself, and trying to guess what the spelling of some of the names, you do your best, but you're not going to get it right 100% of the time, especially when you're dealing with the handwritten records. And again, even on Ancestry and Family Search.
Can I ask?
Yeah. Sure.
Jean,
Yeah.
is Family Search a free?
What? Family Search is free. Yeah.
The
Okay, go ahead.
Ancestry,
Oops, sorry.
the Ancestry, after the end of May, you used to have Ancestry a little bit. This is more of Ancestry till the end of May?
Till the end of May, you're getting the library subscription as if you were in the library.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
'Cause you're-
Is it possible that's going to be extended if the library doesn't open?
I don't know. It's up to Ancestry.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what they're going to decide because they already had it free the whole month of April.
Oh, didn't know
So,
that. Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if they're going to go past May or not.
Okay.
But
Thank
right,
you.
so it's the same thing you would get being in the library, but because of the, you know, pandemic, they wanted to reach out to people and make it free through the libraries for April and May, which was pretty
That's great.
generous.
Yeah.
For them, that was pretty generous, I thought.
Okay. Keep getting up. I went to that German genealogy site and nothing comes up at all. You know, I tried with just the first letter and
Oh,
different names, different combinations. I mean, there are names that have nothing to do with it. And they're so far apart that I wouldn't like send in a form on every one of them
right.
because you can't see the document to see if it's not
Right.
good.
Yeah,
I'm gonna try all these places you told me on Ancestry and trick the 1925 New York State Census. Maybe that'll give me someplace else to start.
Well, at least, you know, if you find them in there, you would have a year to work with and
Well,
go
it
backwards
says
and forwards.
he said he came in 1900. So we missed the 1900 federal census, and on the 1910 it says he was already naturalized. So now,
Oh,
so I'm guessing from 1905 to 1910 is when I have to look,
Hmm.
right?
well, if you go to the 1920 federal census, you could look and see what year he put down.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna look again because
But try that 1920 census, see what
Okay.
year he wrote down. And if you can find him in the New York State Census for 1925, compare the year, see if he put the same year for both of them.
yeah,
And then that would give you more of a ballpark to work with.
yeah. I forgot. I went to the 1905 I wanted to go to the 1905 state census to see where I don't know where he arrived to. I know where he was living then. You know where he was living in 1910, but that's the one that was burned in the fire, right? So they don't have any in 1905.
There's a 1905 New York State Census.
Oh.
The 1890 federal one was the one that was burned.
Oh, okay.
So there is a 1905 state census.
Okay, I'll try a bunch. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's on, you know, that's available on Ancestry and Family Search.
Okay.
Hi,
Great.
Jean, I know you're gonna
Yeah.
be wrapping it up. I just wanted to say thank you. It was very interesting.
Oh, good.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
Take
you're
care.
welcome. See
Okay.
you around.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you very, very much. This is so helpful.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I like doing it.
Thank you, Jean.
You're
Thanks, Jean.
welcome.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye,
guys.
Jean.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So there's Alana. You still, no? Everyone gone? There you are. So is it okay?
Yes.
Except I lost my screen. Well, I clicked on something and it disappeared. I don't know what I hit.
Who knows? All right, comes right back.
I
Oh,
never,